Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Mary Trump Show with her Nerd Avengers. I'm Brown Mary Trump, joined by Ashkenazi Trump. Ashkenazi Trump, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great, Wad. I didn't choose this moniker, but I'm willing to go with it since it seems to
Also
be
known
a
as Jen
habit.
Taub. Jen Taub, now a big deal. She has her own podcast. Jen, shamelessly promote your podcast. What is it called?
It's called Booked Up with Jen Todd, and you have actually been a guest, Wajahat Ali, talking about your fabulous memoir full advice. Is that what it is?
Recommendations.
Recommendations on how to be an American.
This is how we help each other. I'll Venmo you your money. Thank you so much, Ashkenazi Mary Trump, otherwise known as Jen Taub. For those who are new to the show or those who are regulars, yes, we are not Mary Trump. She was feeling a bit under the weather. She's asked us to step in. Of course, we're not married, but we'll try our best. And we're going to be joined by our Nerd Avengers throughout the hour. And this time, we're going to do something a little bit different. In the last 10 minutes of the show, we want to talk to you, community members. So if you have questions for any of us, questions for any of the Nerd Avengers, just type them in there. And Simon the Brit, who hovers in the background, will illuminate the best questions. And we will try our best to get through all of them. And we appreciate you all tuning in every week. But first, before we get to the juicy stuff that's happening in America, we have to look across the Atlantic, Jen, to my former colonizers. We have to give respect to pomp, pageantry, and corruption and racism, and acknowledge that Prince Charles is no longer Prince Charles. He is now King, Jen, and his former side piece, Camilla, is now Queen. Your thoughts, Jen?
Wow. When the monarchy was most recently overseen by a cute old lady whose friend was Paddington Bear,
Oh,
and who, during her lengthy 70 plus year tenure in office, there was much independence happening and sort of decolonization of the globe. The monarchy seemed like a nice, you know, sideshow bit of pageantry. When you have a really unpleasant man like Charles III, whose first namesake Charles I was beheaded, um, and who has been, hated by most Americans since he either orchestrated allegedly, but I doubt that's true. The downfall and later uh, death of his beloved first wife, Diana. The monarchy seems all that more ugly. In other words, you could at one time put lipstick on a pig, but he's not wearing any lipstick. And now monarchy and imperialism and all the full history of the bloody conquest and the racism. And let's talk about what the hell is this? Your status in society is based on a bloodline
mm.
and wars fought thousands of years ago and you believe in the divine right of kings. That is not how I see the world. That's so anti-American. And again, when it was the nice little old lady with the handbag with the marmalade sandwiches, it seemed much more benign. So I'm actually glad to see the monarchy revealed as it is.
And she was also in Naked Gun. Let's not forget that she made a great appearance in the Naked Gun movies. But you're right. It's one of those things which, before we pivot, I do want to mention that this is not just in the past. The scepters that they use, the crowns that they use, those jewels are from African countries and from India
Stolen.
and South Asia. And there was a photo that Simon, our loyal Brit and producer, showed me right before we started, where the official photo of Queen Camilla, you'll go check it out. In the background, like just to her right, to her left, there are these figurines, these Moorish figurines of black women. So I don't know if that was deliberate. I don't know if that was not deliberate, but it just literally surrounds you, the racism, the colonization, and the treatment of Meghan. For those who don't
Yes.
follow royal news, the fact that she had a drop of color in the bloodline, the fact that she was so brown, the concern about the color of their children. This is something that it lingers with us. This stain lingers with us, and it's so interesting that the right wing in America, for some strange reason, really love the monarchy, Jen. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk from the right wing, not even as far as the fascist side of it, but a lot of talk from the ordinary elitist conservatives and the American right that seems to, on the one hand, claim they really love the U.S. Constitution and this idea of equality, But on the other hand, on the hand, you know how one hand wears the glove? You know, do you see
Yeah.
him in the one hand? On the other hand, you know, it's just adoration for wealth, privilege, and status. And this
Mm.
comes, you know, this comes in from that whole blood and soil. And if there was, you know, you want to talk blood and soil, I know that's supposed to be the chant of the right wing. Blood and soil is also what landed gentry, but even the monarchy now, when it's a so-called constitutional monarchy, the idea that there is this legacy of land holdings that tie back to, imperialism and theft, and the fact that people still, hold status in the society in the UK based on these titles of nobility, that is blood and soil. The soil being, land, and the blood being these bloodlines. I mean, yuck.
It,
So it's
it,
not.
it,
It's unpleasant. It's not American. And by the way, let me just be clear: if you live in England and that's a society you have signed up for and you want that, that's fine. But I'm an American, and in fact, my ancestors came to America to get away from that. In fact, my paternal great grandfather, Alex Taub, left England in the early 20th century. And I'm sure I said this on the show, right? Because I like to boast about this in my weird, I'm pro-American, but also like, listen to me way. When he became an automotive engineer, kind of self-taught, didn't go to college, and became a self-taught engineer, was a head automotive engineer at General Motors. During World War II, he went over to Vauxhall Motors, which was owned by GM, and worked to create the Churchill tank. Anyway,
mm,
King George, the guy before, is it King George, the one before Elizabeth? Was that her father?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He offered to give him a knighthood to my great grandfather, but he turned it down because he
Oh,
said,
he's
I'm an
dope.
American.
That's awesome.
I'm an American now. Meanwhile, that's what I think. My family always passed this down as how cool is that? But one of my kids, my daughters, was like, what? I could have been a lady, but it's not that kind of knighthood, right? It's like you did a good thing. It's like,
You're always royalty to us, Gentile. You're always royalty to us.
but
Uh,
anyhow, isn't that so? I want to find the letters. I
that
want to
that
find some
that
evidence.
is a bold stance by your great grandfather, and welcome, Brian. And right before perfect timing because we're about to switch over.
We're now
Uh,
calling me Lady Jen. That's
yeah,
the new
Lady
thing.
Jen, you just missed this
Lady Jen,
wonderful story.
I couldn't come up with anything like Brown Mary Trump. I tried.
You could be Royal Brian. So Lady Jen, we're talking about power, privilege, bloodlines,
Wait,
landowners, whiteness, and
Yeah.
that takes us to Trump
wait. Before
because
we
there's
get to
a
that, though, there's this other thing. The Marquesa
oh
of Chumley. This is this woman. She's apparently, and I have no evidence that it's true, but on the internet there is this terrible rumor, which is probably not true, and I just have to tell you how terrible the rumor is, that Prince William, second, now first in line to the throne, that he's been having an affair, according to these liars. They're terrible people who would say these things, with a woman named Rose. What is her last name? She's Rose Hanbury, and she married a much older gentleman, the Marquez of Chumley. Anyway, so apparently there's a big.
Chumley?
It's spelled. It's a very long word.
if
It's
that is
not.
true, that is juicy gossip. And
And
what about Kate? Kate.
well, apparently,
I'm just
and
going with the
again,
name Chumley.
these are. I would not want anyone to repeat all this because it's absolutely horrid lies that people are saying. And what they're saying, which is outrageous, is that that this has been a problem, and that's why she's not supposed to hang out with the royals. But she was at the coronation, and apparently she has three kids. The older two are twins, and one of her twin sons was standing right next to Prince William, on the balcony during King Charles's coronation. So and also they all wore, what's even more terrible, and this part is true, everyone apparently, and I didn't know this, but there's a certain brand of heels that Meghan wears. Meghan, who's married to Harry. Sorry, guys, but this is what people are saying. And then suddenly Kate wore those heels the other day, and now Rose wore the same heels. So this is evidence of how craven these gossip mongers are, that they're pointing to the shoes and then extrapolating from that there must have been an affair. And then, of course, we know Camilla had admitted to the affair with Prince Charles. And so the rumor now is that Camilla is going to take Rose under her wing to try to undermine Kate, because now there's no more Meghan to hate in the
Am I
news.
supposed to care though?
Ladies, I
You
want
know, listen,
for
I know
those
you're
of
not
you
supposed to care,
I
but
just don't.
but what I'm
for
pointing
those
out to you is this is a multi-billion-dollar business,
Now
which
that
is the
that
tabloids.
yeah.
And I'm only mentioning this because if you think our press is bad, look at what Murdoch has done
right.
in England.
Let's I want to thank Lady Jen for that exquisite Cliff Notes download, because I didn't know all that juice. And we're gonna switch from the Atlantic back home. And speaking about those who want royalty, those who elevate certain authoritarians, like I was saying, pride, privilege, blood and soil. And we're going to talk about blood and soil because there's unfortunately a lot of news here in Texas. But first, we have to talk about Donald Trump, and specifically,
Oh boy.
Jen and Brian. Well, Jen, I'll lead off with this. Tell us where we are with the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit, and specifically, that quote I want to bring up again because it was so vile. Donald Trump, in the deposition wearing obscene orange paint, revisits his infamous quote about grabbing women by the pee. And according to Donald Trump, for a million years, they've allowed celebrities to get away with it. And when asked if it was good or bad, he's like, eh. So that's the character of this man, whom a third of this country wants to make king of the United States of America. But Jen, your thoughts about the E. Jean Carroll case? We might be getting today, right? We might be getting a verdict. I can't hear you, Jen.
I have so many thoughts about the case. As you know, I was there for the first 3 days, the first week of trial. There were 2 weeks of trial. They didn't meet on Fridays, and then yesterday, Monday, the lawyers made their closing arguments, right? And today, the judge gave the jury their instructions.
Oh, it just came out.
They just came out, which I can talk about in a second. I mean, there's 3 things to talk about. One, what happened, what was egregious, like you're saying. 2, what's going on right now, and 3, what are the predictions, right? So in terms of, I think folks have probably heard quite a bit, and maybe they can ask questions at the end if they have them. But to me, what was really critical in watching via Twitter, because some journalists are allowed to have their phones in this special press room, watching Adam Klasfeld and watching this guy who runs a Twitter channel called Inner City News, watching them both, what I gathered is the E. Jean's lawyers just knocked it out of the park, because although Joe Tacopina, when he did his closing, tried to make it, tried to kind of testify, he had a theory of the case, and his theory is E. Jean and her friends just cooked this thing up to hurt Donald Trump. Secondly, that she wants money, and third, that she wants fame. And when after that happened, the lawyers for E. Jean's side just dismantled that in so many ways. One, this happened years ago, and for you to believe that she just cooked this up after Trump was elected and then published this book in 2019 to hurt him would mean that her friends are all lying. Which doesn't make any sense. It would also mean that you would have to disbelieve the other 2 women that said he did the same thing to them. It would mean you have to disbelieve Donald Trump himself, who said that if you're a celebrity, fortunately, he said, unfortunately or fortunately, you just get to grab women by their genitals, and they let you. In other words, he's describing what consent, that you can overcome someone's will and they can't do anything about it. So you'd have to disregard his own testimony. Okay, so it's those things aren't believable. It's not believable she's asking for money, because her lawyers literally didn't ask for money in the closing. In a civil case, it's common for the lawyers in closing to say, here's the amount we want you to give. They didn't specify a number. The only thing about money was when the expert on how to fix a damaged reputation that's been hurt through defamation, she testified a bit about the range of what it would cost to hire corrective ads, but they didn't mention that at all. They didn't ask for damages. And then also finally, the fame thing is, name one woman that you can think of who's come forward against a powerful man and it's helped her reputation.
Yeah. No, I mean, it doesn't happen.
Well,
the arrows come out.
I mean, the former president of the United States didn't do too well after Monica Lewinsky came out. I think it's arguable whether it helped her, but
no. Wait. I'm not talking. No, Brian, we're not talking about what it does for the man.
Yeah,
I
it
know,
hurt.
I know, but what I'm saying is,
It did. It
by
did.
that,
It did
I will
not
say,
help
Brian.
her.
I will say, Brian. It didn't. It didn't help Monica. I mean, for her life, she was tainted with this. I
yeah,
mean, look, she was a young she was a young woman, and for her life, I think until just recently, she had to finally
I
escape the
agree with all
show.
of
But by the way, it's different with her. She didn't argue at the time. You can look back on how young she was, but that was not a lack of consent. I'm talking about women who come forward
Yeah.
and say a powerful
that.
man raped them. Let's look at
Oh, well, that, yes, yes.
or made sexually harassing comments. Uh, we can look at what happened to Anita Hill. We can look at what happened to Christine Blasey Ford. We can look at think about the many women, even the men comedians who were canceled, even several of the men who were canceled because they either said something offensive or did something offensive. They have done their comeback tours. The women
Yep.
who accused them have had their careers ruined. And even the women who spoke up way back when, how they always say, why didn't you come forward earlier? The ones who do come forward earlier were crushed. And some of them never worked again in the industry, for example, in the
Well, I
entertainment
can
industry.
tell you from my mother's point of view, she never came back from the accusation that she leveled an eyewitness as a child,
Mm.
sexual harassment. Yes, I agree with that. You are right there.
So sorry, but that's where. And can I say so? This other two things are what do I think is going to happen? I think it really depends on these couple of jurors, whether if they stay on the jury. That's complicated. It also depends on whether the jurors have read all the angry rants that Donald Trump has put up on Truth Social, despite the fact that his lawyer was told by the judge to stop him from doing that. But I think based on the evidence, a reasonable jury would have to find him liable both for battery, which is what they're arguing, and which includes sexual assault and or less, any unwanted touching, even if it isn't sexual. So the battery and defamation, I think that they're going to find liable. They should. And the
I
only
hope so.
question is how long. I was thinking they would decide that he was liable before lunch because he didn't put on a defense at all. He's complaining on True Social. He didn't have a defense opportunity. Well, his lawyer had a theory, but they put on no evidence whatsoever. So
And
basically, you
They
have
didn't even put on a case.
they did not put on a case. It was only
Conceding
trying.
it.
Right. So basically, they put on no evidence at all on their own side to defend him. It's a civil case. The standard is more likely than not. I think they're sick of eating lunch in that courthouse. And I was thinking they would be done by lunch, but I think coming up with a number is much more difficult than just the other parts of the jury questionnaire.
no, thank you, Jen, for that
And
breakdown.
Simon, can you post that jury questionnaire to the comments? Because I don't have access to the comments, so
Yeah,
folks can see
Jen
that.
just sent us the link in the private chat, and a reminder that more than a dozen women have accused Donald of sexual harassment. And in this particular case, he mistook E. Jean Carroll for his former wife, Marla. Just to let you know, and his defense, actually, he did have a defense. Jen, his defense was, when you're a celebrity and you're rich and powerful, they let you get away
Do
with
those
it for a
things.
million years. That was his defense. I want to pivot real quick, Brian. You've
Yes,
followed
I didn't do it.
Trump. Um, you know that there is an upcoming town hall with CNN. It's tomorrow
Good.
night. Caitlin Collins is the one who's going to be interviewing him. He's going to be fielding questions from audience members. Before we get to the wisdom of whether or not a major network should platform the same man who called him enemy of the state, I have a question for you. If you were
Sure.
there in the audience, or if you were the host, or if you were quote unquote moderating this, what would be the questions you would ask Donald Trump tomorrow night?
If I were to ask Donald Trump
Yeah, if you were
questions,
moderating, if you were Caitlin.
why should anyone ever vote for you? You're a rapist. You're a thief. You have committed crimes against the state of the state of the union. You've committed crime. I could go on for hours. But the first question I would ask Donald Trump is, what gives you the right?
To run again?
What gives you the right to do anything that he does? I have seen him, and I might preface it this way. I might say I've seen you in particularly it was in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, as he landed in Air Force One, and I had a friend on board who watched him, and I saw the video of him saying, "Look at all those suckers," talking about
Mm.
his own supporters. What gives you the right to come forward and to pretend that you're a man of the people when you've never worked a day in your life and you have no idea how any human being who has to work for a living acts? What gives you the right to try and grift? What it's really all about with Donald Trump is the money, and I wouldn't let him go for an hour and a half. I'd grill that son of a bitch on everything. I can't imagine that I would give him. First of all, I don't think I would give him the time. But if he's on air, and I was told, Brian, go after it, you're going to be our guy. Um, honest to God, watch. I still have 3 or 4 notebooks full of questions that were left unanswered during the Trump administration, from the great to the small. How can you say that you support free speech when you call us enemy of the people when we are the people? How can you come forward and say that you support people when anyone who disagrees with you, you have put in essence put out? How is it that everyone that has ever worked for you, that has stepped away from you, has nothing good to say about you? How is it that you have, and he can go on with all his bullshit, but you're going to have to call him on every fucking piece of bullshit, excuse my foul language, that he says, and he will do nothing but lie. And you're going to have to call him on every lie. You're going to have to ask him. You're going to have to call him on every lie. And that would take, I don't know if we'd get past 3 questions with him.
Well, before I turn to Jen to ask the same question, I do want to ask you this, Brian. That's why, unfortunately, or fortunately, you're not part of CNN. That's why you're here with the Nerd Avengers, because you would ask the questions that all of us want to ask, and you'd ask it with the requisite fury and righteous rage that it demands. But speaking about the press in particular, CNN in particular, he has called enemy of the people. For those who don't know, enemy of the people
Called all of us the enemy of the people.
Was what fascists and
Yes.
Stalin referred to the press. Just recently, last week, he said, "I'm going back into enemy territory." He was referring to CNN, folks. CNN, people forget this because it's been an avalanche of bullshit for the past 7 years. CNN had to clear its headquarters and literally stand outside. Don Lemon, when he was at CNN, and others had to stand outside the New York headquarters because there was bomb threats. Caesar Sayok, a MAGA aficionado and a nut who got radicalized from Fox News, had the same hit list of Donald Trump and sent actually functional pipe bombs to his enemies that included CNN anchors. That same network, Brian, is proud to be giving a 1-hour platform in town hall to Donald Trump.
When I tell you,
it's 2023. It's been 7 years. We have learned nothing. Tell me the state of play when it comes to media moving forward when it comes to Donald Trump.
Well, if this were a legit look, Caitlin is fine. I know Caitlin. She was fine in the press briefing room. I know she has a background from the Daily Caller. She's a fine journalist. I have nothing against Caitlin, and I think she would be fine doing this job. I would think that she would handle it with aplomb and professionalism. I think the better move, if you're going to put him on, is to have Jim Acosta interview him, because Jim and I were the 2 that had our press passes pulled by that administration. We fought and beat him in court. Jim asked some of the toughest questions of Donald Trump. I'd like to think I did. I like to think there were others that did. But that would be the move that I think would be the move that should be made by CNN. But I'm not running CNN. And I don't agree with a lot that many news organizations do, including CNN. And I think this is a ratings move. Donald Trump is still good for ratings. If the first question you don't ask him coming out of the box is, Mr. President, first of all, why do you think that you can run for the presidency of the United States after January 6th? What is it I was there. I heard him encourage people to walk up that hill and take arms. I know for a fact that he did not allow that. He, in fact, was happy with armed people because he said, quote unquote, they're not coming after me. Everything that he did on January 6th has to be explained. Start there, finish there, end there. And for the love of God, hold him accountable for what he did. Everyone that's been arrested, charged, tried, and found guilty has blamed Donald Trump and said, or credited Donald Trump and said, hey, I went there doing what the president told me to do. I was there, there were people that died there that day. There was damage done that day. It was not a walk in the park. Get past that, because that's out of everything else that I've had to put up with from Donald Trump for the last 6.5 years. And you're right. We're in the same place we were when he walked down the escalator. We haven't learned a damn thing. You're going to put this man on television when right now he's facing, and if you're all right, you get past January 6th, then let's go through all your legal troubles. You're here, you're there, you're being investigated. How could you possibly be president of the United States? You're going to have to spend all your time defending yourself in court. How can you possibly be president of the United States? How can you call yourself the president for law and order when you're constantly breaking the law? I think I did ask that one of Kayleigh McEnany. She didn't like it, but I think
it's Brian. You make a good point. It's 8 years on since that infamous descent on the brass staircase, and Jen.
And the descent it has been, Waj. A descent is a perfect way to describe it.
Thank you for picking up on my figurative language. 8 years later, Jen, it's 2023. What can we, those who have access to a media platform, do differently, right? Because CNN is going to do what CNN is going to do. CBS is going to do what CBS is going to do. ABC is going to do what ABC is going to do. As Brian was saying, access to power, money, ratings, that's the North Star. But the rest of us have been resisting. Is it going to be another 2-year slog? Do you think people have changed? What is it? What's the pivot point that we can do to counter the bullshit that unfortunately we might see tomorrow night? No, we can't hear you, Jen.
Damn it.
Damn it,
Jen. I disagree with your premise in that I don't think, I think we have a platform, but I don't have, CNN or MSNBC or ABC. We have other access, but to some degree, I think we are speaking mostly to people with our own similar points of view. So the question is,
that's what everybody's doing, Jen. That's the media today.
Right.
People
and
do
so,
not get out of their media silos.
Well, wait. But that's not a bad, recognizing who your audience is important. And so I think if our audience are people who vote or people who think like us but don't vote, or people who know people who think like us and don't vote, I really think voter turnout is everything, and enthusiasm is everything about defeating him a second time around is really important. But here's the deal. There are different things that could come down the road. He may not be the candidate.
He won't be, but I don't think.
And if he's not the candidate, we've got to think very strategically, because I know what I'm dealing with this guy. The biggest problem is that there are people in the entire Republican establishment through and through. I can't think of a single, other than like Liz Cheney, who's no longer in office. I can't think of a single Republican right now who's in office who's really standing up to Trump.
None. And
who's really saying this guy sent his violent supporters to physically attack the Capitol building and to try to kill the vice president. And he still claims that he
another question to ask.
Right. He still claims that he won the election. He's an unapologetic rapist and racist. And you are not doing or saying anything because you want to keep your hold on power, which tells me, I think it's really important now more than ever, up and down the ticket, to make sure every single Republican, every one of them, is branded with the Donald Trump brand.
Yeah, Jen, I think you're missing a point.
Yeah,
it's not just that putting him on the air and there's no one supporting him. Putting him on the air and saying, all right, look, we've got.
Oh, I didn't say to put him on the air.
I'm saying, but putting him on the air, people will look at him, and we have our own silos we go into, et cetera, et cetera. My concern about him being on television is not just the insurrection, not just the fact that he wanted to kill Mike Pence, not just the fact that they actually put together a scaffold there, and I saw that. And it's not all of the other things that you mentioned, which are important. What I'm concerned about is, for example, the guy who listens to his rhetoric and then goes out and commits murder in his name, or in the name of his policies, in the name of what he wants to do. That, as we've seen, that's happened often. Yes. And those are the people that were activated on January 6th.
Yeah.
Donald Trump being on television is a danger to not only the American government, but a danger to every one of us.
Brian,
He is no different than Charles Manson.
It's
right?
called
He sends people out
terrorism.
to murder.
It's called
Yes.
stochastic terrorism. We mentioned it on Mary's show before, and for those who
Yeah,
don't know what the stochastic terrorism is, when in particular mass media targets certain individuals and groups that results in random but statistically probable acts of violence. So threats against law enforcement after Donald Trump targets them after the raid on Mar-a-Lago, threats against poll workers, threats against hospital workers and doctors after the grooming conspiracy, threats against educators, threats against law enforcement, threats against our elected officials. That's what we're dealing with when it comes to stochastic terrorism, and that's now mainstream. Go ahead.
And it's not just Waj and Brian and I are saying this, right? But I want you to keep in mind, and I know folks may know this, but let's just pause for a moment and reflect on the fact that in a civil trial in federal court, something highly unusual happened. Two different things. One, there is an anonymous jury. That means when I was in the jury room, we didn't hear the names of any of the jurors or any really closely personally identifiable information. They all had numbers. Secondly, it wasn't just an anonymous jury. The jury did not come and go to the courtroom on their own. There were federal marshals who met the jurors at some meeting point. So the juror would wake up in the morning. They had a designated meeting point. A marshal would come pick them up and drive them into the courtroom through the basement, and they would leave the same way. This isn't a civil case. This is the kind of stuff you do in a mob trial. We have a federal judge with real concerns that someone supporting Trump would try to murder or get to, in some way, bribe a juror. This is the guy that is actually the leader of the Republican Party. He is a scary, mobbed up sociopath.
And I'm so glad, Jen. I'm so glad you used the mob analogy, because so many people have seen TV shows and movies, but that's exactly it. In these trials, to protect witnesses and jury members from getting whacked or compromised, these are the extraordinary steps that certain judges take. And that's what's happening, as you mentioned, in a civil trial between him and Eugene Carroll. So what do you think? And just one thing, Brian, you mentioned this, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because oftentimes we don't put this at the forefront. We know what happened. January 6th happened. A failed violent insurrection against our free and fair democracy, where armed MAGA protesters, who from their own admission were radicalized by the big lie, incited by President Trump, came in part to kill not only Mike Pence, and I always try to win people over, Jen. I always try to tell people this. If you think you're protected from whiteness, your Republican affiliation, and Christianity, they tried to kill Mike Pence, the most white Christian Republican man on earth, and they tried to kill Nancy Pelosi, and bring it all full circle with stochastic terrorism. David DePape, a guy who couldn't finish the job on January 6th, got radicalized by the big lie, went to Nancy Pelosi's home, and attacked her husband, who almost died. Yeah, and I do want to pivot real quick in the interest of time, talking about terror. And speaking about terror and violence and Republican leadership, let's go to Texas.
Texas, I lived there for a while.
We got it, because
one thing. What's one thing before you pivot?
Yes, please, real quick.
Jen is absolutely right about the mob, and think of it this way. Imagine if John Gotti, while under indictment and being prosecuted by Rudy Giuliani, appeared on a CNN talk show at town hall. That's what you're going to get with Donald Trump. John Gotti in a town hall, Donald Trump in a town hall.
John Gotti in orange makeup. But speaking about terror, and I really want to mention the word terror, because part of me is thinking, hey, Danielle, how's it going? Perfect timing. We're talking about stochastic terrorism. We're talking about Donald Trump, the mob boss. We're talking about this authoritarian who is unleashing his minions and his followers, who are wreaking havoc on us. And I'm very curious how long the majority will allow itself to be hijacked by the terror of the right and those who are unhinged. I'll give you an example. Let's go to Texas. In Texas, we have the leadership of Governor Abbott. About a year and a half ago, Texas, along with a lot of other red states, passed the concealed gun laws, concealed carry, which means that folks above the age of 18 don't need training or a permit to literally conceal weapons. As a result, surprisingly, violence has gone up. Law enforcement has said, hey, this is making us less safe. There's gun violence on the regular. And this is just what happened recently in Allen, Texas. All right. Mauricio Garcia, 33, is a gunman, excuse me, in Dallas. He killed 8 people at an outlet mall in suburban Dallas. He posted photographs of the shopping center 3 weeks before the attack on social media, where he fantasized about race wars and the collapse of society. He also used an account on a Russian social media platform to reference, quote, the noble war, a phrase that many white supremacists use to describe their belief in impending race war. It says that he also has neo-Nazi beliefs, and he also was wearing a tactical vest with a patch that read RWDS, which stands for Right Wing Death Squad, a phrase that is popular with extremist groups, including neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and the Proud Boys. Danielle,
I'm so
your
glad
take, your
that
take on this. Perfect timing.
that I showed up right now. You know, I gotta tell you that this is all just so fucking wild. One, it blows my mind that we needed time to figure out that the shooter was a Nazi, or they like to keep saying Nazi sympathizer. When you decide to tattoo SWAT stickers to your actual body, I think that sympathizer is a euphemism, right?
But he's Latino, Danielle. He's
Right.
Latino.
Wait, is
And
that
so-
a new word?
Right,
You've
is it-
Euphemism?
you
Yes.
have to go through a
Trademark
test
it.
to be a Nazi, or is it just that you want to be a Nazi?
Right. So, and then here's a wake up call for all of white America, apparently, which is that you don't need to be white in order to support fucking white supremacy. You do not need to be white in order to be an absolute abhorrent racist. Right. And so you look no further than Enrique Tario, who was just charged and found guilty of seditious conspiracy, who was one of the leader of the Proud Boys, who, by the way, was also selling those little badges on his fucking website. Right. So that's where that came from Donald Trump's group that he told to stand back and stand by. What pisses me off is that mainstream media fails to make the fucking connections between the terrorist organization formerly known as the Republican Party and these actors that are their foot soldiers that are building militias because they are being directed to, right? Build these militias by Abbott, by Ron DeSantis, by all of these other governors who are in the midst of these mass shootings, still loosening gun laws, still saying that right now in Texas, passing legislation that says, guess what? You don't need a fucking license. You don't need any training. All you need apparently is just a holster for your fucking handgun or a backpack for your AR-15. So they are purposefully creating legislation that allows people to build their personal weaponry and to build out these militias. Why?
Good.
Because this is how they're going to get the autocratic job done. And it is the failure of the media to connect the dots and stop treating the Republican Party as if they are anything other than terrorist enablers, if they're anything other than people right now who have passed over 400 pieces of legislation to ban trans people from existing, to ban books, to ban curriculum, over 400 pieces of legislation that are anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans pieces of legislation, anti-drag pieces of legislation. And at the same time, people are getting their literal faces blown off, their bodies blown apart.
Yeah, that was Danielle. That was, I mean, you're talking about a face getting blown off. One of the most, I mean, just chilling things that I've read is a person who survived that shooting, who tried to help the survivors. He saw a girl slumped over, and he turned the girl around, and the girl's face was blown off. There is a child who was just released. He's 8 years old. He lost his mother, his father, and his 3-year-old sibling. He just got released from the ICU last night. I mean, this is the type of terror that we have to survive and endure as Americans. We have more guns than people in this country of 330 million. There have been more shootings than days in the year 2023. And despite all of this, Governor Abbott and others say they want more guns, and they're wearing AR-15 pins. And Jen, another story that happened in Texas that I have to get your comment on, and I hate saying this, we have to go full circle to blood and soil and Nazis and language. I remember, before I tell people what happened in Texas here, you might have seen that a driver, they're saying at that point, intentionally drove through a group of Venezuelan. Intentionally, that's what they're saying at first. When I was in Auschwitz, I was talking to a guard. The guard said he volunteers. And he said, I volunteered because my grandfather survived this place. We were talking about American politics. I was with a bunch of Americans about 5 years ago. He was listening. And we were talking about the demonizing language of Trump and MAGA towards immigrants and Muslims. And he leans in and he says this: it always begins with language.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it starts. Immigrants have been called criminals. They've been called rapists. There was a caravan of immigrants, right? When it comes to Nazi ideology and white supremacists, the Great Replacement Theory, which comes from the swamps of the Nazis and the KKK, is now a mainstream GOP talking point. And another story in Texas, in Allen, Texas, a suspect accused of killing 8 people because he drove a vehicle into a group near a Texas migrant shelter. He now faces 8 counts of manslaughter.
Murder. Oh, yeah, manslaughter.
Your take on this, Jen?
Well, I'm against it. I mean,
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you for clearing that up, John.
Thank you.
We were worried.
It was doubtful.
yeah, I mean, it is. You know, I just it's interesting to me how these abstract ideas like hate and blame and taking these narratives, you know, when they become violent against something, you know, taking a particular person's life, killing somebody that you don't know, because these people kill these complete strangers upon whom you have projected all of your hate and even transferred your own grievance. I mean, because people who are full of hate and violence, it doesn't come from directly from the stories they've been told. It comes from, you know, all the stuff that you carry around. Every person grows up with some kind of oppression or grievance, or someone's mistreated them. And the idea that instead of working through that stuff psychologically, instead of saying, I'm going to join in coalition with others to find justice because there's injustice, to say, no, instead, I'm going to take all of that built up anger and I'm going to boil it up hotter and hotter, and I'm going to direct it at a target. That stuff, that channeling and directing of that anger doesn't come from within. That comes from without. That comes from people with an agenda to either keep your eyeballs glued to a screen, or to sell you a gun, or to sell you a political party, or to sow chaos. And I just think, you know, anything we can do to try to express that everybody has humanity and that violence is never the answer, and to try to point out who the people are that are manufacturing the narratives that these people use in order to express pure violent, you know, racist, hateful rage against others. And the problem is that some of these stories are really old. Racism is as old as, if not before, the colonies. So, you know, when something is so much embedded in the society, it's easy to just pick up that narrative. And I just want to point back to something, you know, what Danielle said, which is, you know, we've talked about it before. She said, you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. And just think about, someone asked me this other day and they didn't understand, and it was a white guy. And the way I explained it to him is I said, well, think of it this way. When you say you're a white supremacist, what you're saying is the hierarchy. You're talking about hierarchy, and you're saying that overall, if you're a white supremacist, you're saying white people are better than everybody else who's not white. That's what white supremacy is. And so what does that mean? Does it mean if you're a black person and you're a white supremacist, does that mean you're self-loathing? Not necessarily. It means that you think you hate all other black people, but you think you're better than them and that you should be treated like one of the white people, right?
Hey, Clarence Thomas, looking at you, buddy.
And it's
Too
similar
soon, Danielle. Too soon.
and it's similar to this. We were just talking about the royals. You can be a royalist
That's right.
and not a member of the royal family. In fact, people love that, right? And it's because that's this order of things. They've decided they're fine with that order of things, and they want to talk about who, the rival. They want to live in that world, and no one second guesses that. No one says, "Are you a self-loathing commoner that you're a royalist?" So these things, it may seem like a contradiction, but it's about how you see the hierarchy. And then you think you're better. If you are a royalist, you think you're better than the other commoners because you understand the order of things.
There are white people who are against white supremacy, and there are people of color who support white supremacy. This is nothing new. And before I get to Brian, I know, Brian, you've been waiting. Jen made a very good point, and this is the latest news that came out about this. I think we could call him perhaps a shooter, a terrorist in Dallas, Texas, is that he was originally an incel. And he, in his post, revealed a massive self-loathing, which then turned to a loathing of women. And then he latched on to neo-Nazi beliefs. These are incredibly damaged people, oftentimes alienated from society, who find a group online that gives them purpose and vision, a type of quote-unquote gray, a black and white clarity, and a feeling of superiority. And that's why they go to these ideologies and then get radicalized. And these ideologies that are caked into neo-Nazi, white supremacist groups are now mainstream from the Republican Party. Brian, and we got
now basically you're blaming Ronald Reagan because he got rid of healthcare, mental health care when he was in office, and I'll go with you on that. Look, we've had problems among people since we crawled out of the caves. And you've got Christians, Muslims, and Jews, all Semitic people who fight with each other. You have racism that has been around since the very beginning of time. The problem we have now is that we have a disconnect, and we don't seem to understand that for every action, there is an opposite and equal reaction. So your hatred, the stuff that happens to you, feel it's okay to push out against that, not realizing that there's going to be a reaction to it. That's part of the problem. The real problem, we talk about the media. Yeah, the media, Danielle, you make an excellent point. We're fucked. but it's been that way since because.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for that note of optimism and hope.
I love when Danielle's like, that's it.
We're tied to making money. Until you change that, you won't change. But the media. But there is a bigger problem. We know about all the problems, and so do most of the people who hear about, who only stay in the Fox News silo. They hear about the problems filtered through the lens of Fox. We get information. Our ability to disseminate, understand, and actively engage other people is limited because in social media we hide, because in social media it's anonymous, because people who do have problems are then able to reach out and make you talk, Waj, about the guy who was, incel. Well, he was reaching out for someone somewhere, and someone found him. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I see this all. I know this is really weird, but I see it goes back to parenting and communication. If you don't, part of the problem is we're not communicating effectively what the problems are and not allowing people to envelop ideas that are different from what they believe because we're too busy attacking one another. What? And if we do that, then if we continue to do that, we're going to have the problem. But the biggest problem we have with guns is not that they are available because they always have been. It's that you will never get rid of them because if Steve Scalise, right, can be a victim of a mass shooting and still defend the right to carry without any thought at all, then you have to address it at that fundamental level. Vote the son of a bitches out.
Real quick, good point, Brian, reminding us that Steve Scalise was a victim and doubles downs for guns, the instrument that almost killed them, and they're wearing AR-15 pins to Congress, folks. I got to pivot real quick. I know Danielle has a point, so I'm going to go to Danielle. As we promised, the final 10 minutes of Nerd Avengers this time, we're going to take your questions. And one of the questions that came up 30 minutes ago was about the debt ceiling. And speaking about being terrorized by the Republican Party, an individual asked us, what do we think is going to happen with the debt ceiling crisis? I'm going to go to you, Danielle, and I know you wanted to make another point.
Yeah, just quickly, I'll say I agree wholeheartedly with Brian. And I think that towards the end when you said that this goes back to communication, it goes back to parenting, it goes back to community, right? And the goal that Fox News and the Republican Party has is to create this toxic level of divisiveness, is to create this disconnect and put everybody as crabs in a barrel and create these silos where they get to tell you about your neighbor down the street instead of you actually going to talk to your neighbor, where they get to make up the stories about the big black boogeyman or the Jewish person that's taking over X, Y, and Z, and forcing you into this place of fear where you don't connect on your own and all you receive are their lies. And so how do you combat that? Guys, branch out as much as fucking possible. Connect with people in real life and online. That is how, by having strong community and building community with people who don't look like you, don't love like you, don't play like you, that is part of the way that we combat this siloed fear effect.
And which is why we're very lucky to have this show, Nerd Avengers. And I want to thank Mary again, who's feeling under the weather, for pretty much bringing us together and giving us a space for an hour to talk about these issues. And I hope this show is helpful and informative and fun for those who are watching and listening right now. And like we said, we're going to do Q&A. And one of the first questions that came, and Danielle, I'll go to you and then I'll go to Jen, was about the debt ceiling crisis. It's critical right now. I mean, this is America's ability to pay back its debts, but also whether or not we can, have a functioning economy. And it's the only country in which one of the two political parties, the Republican Party, literally hold the country, the economy, and in a way, the global economy hostage to cut very important government programs that alleviate the suffering of a majority of Americans. So they're pretty much saying, you better cut these programs and then we'll give you permission to pay back your debts and have a budget. It's holding the rest of us hostage. That's what's happening right now. Brian, well, let me go to Danielle first because I promised I'd get her thoughts. And then Brian, you're next. Danielle, what's going to happen?
I mean, what's going to happen with the debt ceiling is what always happens, right? Which is that the Republicans are hostage takers. They want to cut social safety nets. They want to cut all programs that are actually beneficial to people, and then be able to turn around and give big tax cuts, balloon the defense budget. It's the same shit, different day. And the reality is that here is where the Democrats and Joe Biden need to tell the story, right? Like, we're going to be a deadbeat country, right? Because the Republicans don't care about your day-to-day life. Their only point is cruelty. Their only point is despair. And so it's Democrats that need to tell that story about this terrorist organization formerly known as the Republican Party.
Brian, go for it.
Yeah, you got to remember the most important thing about the debt ceiling is the GOP cut the taxes that pays the debts, and now they want to stop the government and redirect the fact that they want to cut social services. They couldn't get it any other way. This is all politics. This is all BS. Where do I think the deficit would be if Trump were reelected? Triple. Look, the simple fact of the matter is... I mean,
that's what happened. Wait, Brian, real quick. That's what happened during the presidency.
Yes. The fact of the matter is that I hope it doesn't come down to this. Today, the president is meeting with McCarthy in the Oval, and they're going to try and hammer out an agreement. At some point in time, I think McCarthy will go back to his people and say, look, I tried, but we can't default on our loans. We can't be that guy. I think that there is that understanding in Congress, but I don't think it's going to get there very easily. And I think at the end of the day, he may have to invoke the 14th Amendment. I don't think there'll be bank runs. I think that when they look and stare down the barrel that this is, I think they will compromise and come to a decision. My concern, and the concern that we all should have, is that are they going to cut social services and social funds to increase big business, which is what they've done. They've got to, Donald Trump created this mess 3 times. 3 times Congress bailed his ass out. And now the Republicans, who are butt sore that they're not in charge, want to screw the Democrats and make it look like they're the ones that are the problems, when it is in fact their actions that precipitated this crisis. And they should be held accountable for it every freaking second. And anytime the press doesn't hold them accountable for it, that's another mark against this, because the GOP caused this problem plain and simple. No whataboutism. No, no.
It isn't both sides. It isn't both
Yeah,
sides,
there's
and I'm
no
glad
both
you mentioned
sides
that. Jen,
Yeah, for folks who want to read something really good on this, I get an email, and I don't know if you can just get this from the Times on the Times' own website. There's something called The Morning, and this was written today by German Lopez, and he goes through the 4 different things that could happen. I mean, first is the so-called clean increase, and that's what was done under Trump several times. That's where Congress raises a debt limit with no conditions. This is ideal. I just don't think it's going to happen without. Well, I mean, it could happen. It depends who blinks. The second thing would be what Brian was talking about, the negotiated raise, which is where there's some way that either, and I hope Biden doesn't give in, where we give in to some sort of massive number of cuts without specifying what they would be. Another way to negotiate it would be to kick the can down the road 6 more months, for example. That seems more likely. The third thing that could happen would be Biden takes some kind of executive action, and that could be saying, you know what, we don't think that the legislation is even constitutional under the 14th Amendment. We're going to ignore it. That's another thing. And another executive action he could take is minting the so-called $1 trillion coin. I think he's more likely than not to do the first, just to say the 14th Amendment says that we can do what we want. And the final thing, which would be utterly catastrophic, which someone asked about, would be we actually default on June 1st or thereafter. Mark Zandi, who's the chief economist of Moody's, called it a financial Armageddon. To me, what's so catastrophic about it is it's forever. And it completely would change our role in the global order. And for those of people who hate America or think American supremacy is a bad idea and they don't want all the goodies that go with that, which is what we have now in terms of the dollar being the reserve currency, in terms of U.S. treasuries being, so-called safe assets. If that goes away, it's utterly destructive. And I think the Republicans actually might want that because they kind of want a banana republic and they want, so it's a very dangerous game of chicken. And I just hope.
I don't think they want it, Jen. I've talked to a lot of members of Congress. I think they don't understand, and they think it's a power play, and they can make Biden back down before they get there. I don't think they understand. But damn stupid.
But
Biden is not going to blank. Biden
but the consequences that Jen is talking about, when this happened last time, it negatively affected U.S. credit rating. It caused turmoil in the global economy. It took 6 months for America to recover.
And we didn't even default then, right? We just got to the very day.
That would be just, like you said, disastrous. And so we're dealing with financial terrorists. We're dealing with gun terrorists. We're dealing with neo-Nazis. We're dealing with a radicalized, weaponized group that is willing to self-immolate and burn this country down just to feel great again. And I feel like on Mary's show, we keep it real. We try to keep it honest. We don't do bullshit. We don't do both sides on the show. I think we try to be as honest as possible, and we try to bring the facts and data to back it up. And I'd like to thank Jen for her bullet points. You could tell she's a professor. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm like, Professor Jen.
Let me tell you, that's German Lopez. I was cribbing from his great organization.
You already gave him you gave him a shout out too, and you give people shout outs too. We have 2 more minutes, and I want to honor, like we said, we're gonna do Q&A. There was a question that came. There was a pandemic, folks. Remember that? It killed more than 1 million Americans. Well, there's a question about the CDC and Rochelle Walensky, who just resigned. Rochelle Walensky was the director of the CDC. Your thoughts about Walensky and the CDC's role in managing this pandemic, Danielle, that killed over 1 million Americans?
I was thinking about this when I saw the announcement about her resignation. And, first, what I will say is that over 1 million Americans died, and we have not a day to honor them. We have not a day. And, you may think like, oh, what is that? It's just pageantry. No, it is not. Like I don't think that people still are able to wrap their minds and hearts and emotions around the trauma that we have all experienced, because there is not a person that does not know somebody that was lost during the pandemic. And we do not even take a beat. Everything is just quote unquote back to fucking normal. Right in this, this hamster wheel called capitalism, and not a time to honor those that were lost and those who are going to be and continue to suffer from long COVID, right? Which has devastating consequences that disallow some to even be able to work, right? So I will say that, but the resignation of Walensky, look, the CDC showed itself to be an organization that does not work well under pressure. Showed itself to be an organization that fell to the whims of politics and politicians, as opposed to keeping the safety and well-being of the public at the forefront of everything that they did. And her resignation, in my humble opinion, should have come sooner than it has. But just a reminder again to folks that it's 3 years later, and while it is no longer considered a global threat, the devastation, emotional, physical, mental devastation will be felt for generations.
It has traumatized an entire young generation, Gen Z, of high school students and college students. We've all buried someone who got COVID before the vaccine, and it has also caused financial devastation. And it also revealed, in my opinion, the great disparity in this country. It was a great X-ray of how those who sometimes are more poor or more darker skinned have less equity and access to healthcare and resources, and how we truly treat our frontline workers and our first responders. It shows that we can do a lot better. I want to thank everyone for joining us for the show. Mary's under the weather. Jen and I tried our best as Brown, Mary Trump, and Ashkenazi Trump. We like to thank Danielle and Brian, as always, for being loyal Avengers. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for coming back every week. And hopefully next week, we will have the OG Mary back. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your family. Take care of your health. And find joy where you can. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.
Thank you.